Welcome back, my lords, ladies, and lieges, to another episode of Zodiac Reads, the series where Zodiac finds things on the internet he wants to read, and then, well, he reads them for you. Today we are back on r/RPG horror stories for another story that is quite horrific indeed. While the story does mention a slight content warning at the beginning, so I won't repeat it here, I do also want to add that there is a lot of really blatant and very gross sexism throughout this whole story that the person does deal with in this story. So if that is not something you would like to hear about in a story, I would give this video a pass. But without further ado, let's get into the tale. Party from Hell by user the Chandraraj. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I do apologize if I'm not. This was all almost nearly 10 years ago, so some in-game story details may be a little foggy. Here's hoping this story can entertain, if not educate a little. Names are changed, etc., etc. I don't write things too graphically, but there is some mention of child abuse, unfortunately. Cast: me, myself, playing a halfling fighter. At the time, the only girl for most of the run of it. Was also new to D&D, but not role-playing, and was happy to find a group willing to take me in at my local community college. London, half-elf ranger. Pleasant dude, but seemed like he was allergic to bathing. He had a stench that could peel paint off of a tank in space. Brony, elf paladin. A big guy who liked to draw, especially My Little Pony, which was the style at the time. Notorious for going on long-ass tangents and drawing women with astronomically large tits. Mitch, human scion? 3.5 edition homebrew or something. Soft-spoken guy who always seemed to have his brain on somewhere else. At the time, we just called him a flake. Now, the proper term for it is simp. He had the books on hard drive and would sometimes leave the game to help random girls move, leaving us without resources. Other times, he'd bring totally disinterested girls to play without any explanation of what this game was. Don't bring your new crushes to a long-running game, folks, especially if they've never played before. Brobarian, a half-orc barbarian, still my friend to this day, just a guy who wanted to play D&D. A sweetheart, if not a little oblivious to how awful things got. Big Sexy, the DM. Big Sexy was, at first glance, a little different from how you would picture a cringe DM from hell. He was kind of an enigma with age. The way he spoke about himself and his life experiences made him sound like a man in his 40s, if not mid-30s. Apparently, according to him, he was either divorced or just had a baby mama, and had daughters. He was also apparently in the Yakuza, but I have a really hard time believing that. He practiced hygiene and was, on first glance, well-spoken. The fedora was a red flag, but, in his defense, he wore a fedora with a fitted vest, shirt, and pants. Like, it matched, and it didn't look like a colorblind fashion disaster. He looked super out of the time, sure, but I'd chalk that up to him being kind of quirky. At first, it was a dream come true. A large group of nerds who I could share interests with and finally try this game? Amazing! It started out fun and lighthearted. It was a group of 12+ that would switch in and out. Never join a group of more than 5 to 6. That's just begging for overcrowding problems. Since I was new and we had such a huge party with all the roles filled, I decided to play a character dubbed Hildo Bender, a halfling fighter and gigolo. He was mostly there to be comedic relief, a coward, a leech, and a party animal. After some disagreements between DM, other players, and other issues I don't exactly remember, the DM decided to add a new element to the story that basically sent us back in time and to level 1, all with a shaved-down cast of like 5. The story was basically sort of rebooted and became a more proper adventure you'd expect. Instead of just goofing around, there were dungeons to clear, towns to visit, goals, and so on. Another huge difference was made with my character. The DM had a terrible time remembering that Hildo was a man. Not sure how. I even drew him, and there was plenty of time to mentally establish I wasn't playing a woman. So, out of frustration after the millionth she was tossed their way, I asked, "Do you want me to just play a woman?" "Yes, please." Here was the first red flag. After Hildo became Hilda with the time change, That is where everything started to change. We started playing at my grandparents' place after the time change. They had a large basement. I was living with them at the time, and they were happy to see me socializing. It was also more private than playing at the community college. So the guys started whipping out their phones and laptops way more often. Not the biggest offense in the world. I get it, I get distracted too. But they were looking up dating sites to rate the women. If they weren't judging potential dates, they were looking at porn and just kinda sharing it with each other. Look, we all have needs, but we're here to play a game. I'd rather not have the game be delayed because a bunch of nerds decided to roll the dice under the table. Most my pleas went unyielded until the DM decided it was time to play, and even then the pictures were still up and very visible, just not being ogled like a cartoon. Food etiquette was not a thing. I try to be a good host when I have people over. I make sure they have something to eat, drink, are comfortable, etc. So I would go to the kitchen, cook a cheap pizza, bring it down, go back upstairs and get drinks, come back with drinks, and the pizza was all gone. Okay, time to make another. Go all the way back upstairs, cook another, go back downstairs, and they descended like locusts. A lot of my memories playing with this group are accompanied by a growling stomach and crumb-laden mess. They'd end up being halfway through combat too, leaving me out of the fray once it got to my turn. Big Sexy's attitude towards women started to really surface once out of the open of college. Some of this starting with the things he allowed the players to just kinda have. Lady NPCs were almost always sexy lamps to just be given to players. London's ranger couldn't go anywhere without his sexy, busty, obedient succubi girlfriend, wife, whatever. Apparently, she was a whole thing in the original game. He'd won her over with something, and even in the damn time reset, still felt bound to be with him and vice versa. There was no arc about them remembering each other or falling back in love. Just kinda status quo to the rescue. Didn't want to think so hard. Their love was legit, so her succubi ways didn't hurt him. Or the lawful good paladin played by Brony. Just heroic. Blessed by the one god who was all just a god of goodness. Oh, we'll get there, don't worry. He needed a girl too. So he got a 14-year-old sex slave healer. So I was willing to let this stupid succubi thing go, but this is goddamn gross. I argued until I was blue in the face about how this was both disgusting to deal with as a player, as well as not lawful good. I yelled at a man who supposedly had daughters while a grown man having a child concubine was not good. His argument, well, in medieval times, it was common for men to marry yet younger, so it's lawful. This wasn't medieval England, France, anywhere on Earth. Entirely different world. This world's history does not have to apply to this fantasy game. Big Sexy, by having this blank slate and filling it with the notion that child slavery is not just a thing, but a thing that is legally and culturally smiled upon by the god of all that is good, has basically said that this was okay. There was no cynicism, no sarcasm, just flat out, well, it's legally good because people accept it. I was brushed aside as being too sensitive and needing to understand history more. I wish I had booted them out after this. I wish I'd stopped playing. But I was still a kid, lacking life experience, and had never heard the adage of no D&D is better than bad D&D. Mitch needed a sexy lamp too. Heaven forbid there be a player without a love interest. At this point, I had volunteered to voice the lady NPCs for him. I enjoyed doing voices, and it put a damper on every woman having an eliding Irish falsetto, so bonus points. Another bonus to me being given the keys to the NPCs was being able to steer things away from just sexy woman of some sort of flavor to be won over. Sometimes they would already be married, in a relationship, gay, or just plain not interested. That wasn't to say there wouldn't be some women interested. Mitch had his pick, and one of them was a barmaid. Feisty, stood up for herself, and didn't exactly let people make a fool of herself. She expected a commitment and someone she wouldn't have to mother. She wasn't exactly trying to marry up either. Her family ran a chain of bars that brought in quite a bit of coin. She was dubbed a nag by the party because she wanted him to at least drop by and assure her he was safe. Now then, a bit of world building. The world we played in had one god, and the god was the god of everything except evil. There was a huge emphasis on how they were good. They were basically Christianity God. And like in Christianity, God had one son. Introducing Alistair, the DMPC Paladin, because this game wasn't already on a very slippery slope. Despite our party being pretty damn competent, all things considered, what with how literally Big Sexy gave out levels, feats, magic items, money, we needed the literal son of God. Alistair had everything maxed out and then some. He was sought after by people far and wide for his wisdom. He could easily lift up the side of a house all by himself, and he was always just and right. He was nimble and smart and healthy and good-looking beyond compare. Men wanted to be him, women wanted to be with him, and I wanted to die. This guy got saddled with us because apparently our OP party wasn't safe by ourselves from bandits and monsters we made easy work out of. Off he went with our party without even being asked. A cycle began that drained whatever joy out of combat. A big foe would appear, party would get ready to fight, Alistair would charge into action and end it in one move. So he'd do everything and leave us with our thumbs up our asses. All the people loved him. Except Hilda, my character. Hilda had changed quite a bit since being reset, and instead of the licentious coward, she was a tough-as-nails scrapper. She loved a good fight, and being yanked around by this guy only to have him protect her from something she didn't need help with just enraged her. Above all that, he was self-important, self-righteous, and would go on long, dramatic speeches that would put her to sleep. That may have been some projecting on my part, I admit, but I don't think it was wholly out of character or wrong. We don't need you. If you're so strong, why don't we save the world over here and you go save the world somewhere else? A notion that was scoffed off by him. Feelings were made very obviously clear by me in the tired, glazed eyes of the players, but Alistair was here like a bad rash. Somewhere along the way, the group had to get something from the Amazons. The Amazons, who were clearly 100% evil because they were atheist and hated men. Okay. The Amazons got smote to hell, and we got 4 converted young Amazonian women, 4 more intended prizes for the guys, 4 more women for me to play, now with character sheets. So I could have and should have said no more or refused to play the NPCs, but I was intrigued at the concept of these women and making personalities and giving them different arcs, and yeah, no, that was going to be ignored. I don't remember 3/4 of them, sorry, but there is one that sticks out in my mind. One of the Amazonians was basically adopted by Alistair, taught Paragon the gods' ways, and became a paladin herself. I played her as this battle-hardened woman who was also curious about this new world she was experiencing. That's when she and Brobarian forged a genuine romance. It wasn't planned or anything. They had gotten stuck somewhere for basically a year, her, Brobarian, and some other people. But the two liked each other's battle styles and would spar, then talk about their common goals in life. Brobarian was a half-orc from a far-off land in search of wisdom to bring home someday. She was also in a state of wanting to learn all the new things and to discover herself. It was a slow burn, but the two would help each other in combat, joke, spar, and explore the town together. Big Sexy didn't like that. Alistair didn't like that. Alistair all of a sudden got very paranoid about this half-orc that he had already spent lots of time with now that he was holding hands with his adult ward daughter with a greatsword. Alistair demanded to know his intentions and declared that he couldn't taint his girl like that. Gross. He went on, casting Detect Evil, Detect Alignment, Zone of Truth, all of these tests to declare him evil. Why? He's a half-orc, and orcs are evil. Now, on first glance, this could have been an interesting turn. The all-righteous paladin being a raging bigot, a crack in his morality. All better ideas with a better writer. This was just Big Sexy not being happy with the pretty Amazon girl making kissy faces with an orc. Brobarian, a very shy dude in real life, after all of these accusations and tests, just shyly brought out his character sheet and pointed to his alignment. I'm chaotic good. Brobarian, the character, was indeed very good. He didn't hurt people unless they started it, and while he didn't understand all of the laws or even like them, he abided until something was genuinely off-putting or wrong. He went out of his way to help people with jobs all across town. And so, after all the tests and the magic even saying he was good, he was still not good enough for his little girl. He forbade him from seeing the Amazon. The two didn't listen for a while, going behind his back because, consenting adults. All until Alistair basically banished her to some far-off mountain to hone her skills, throwing her out of the game until further notice. She bade goodbye to the Brobarian, saying it wasn't goodbye, just until they meet again. A goodbye that genuinely rang sad. Hilda wasn't excluded from the run romance shenanigans. She as a character was a bruiser. She wasn't fancy or feminine. She had no interest in long-term romances, and the romances she was interested in was with women. In a world full of factory-made ladies, you'd think this would be no problem for her. Nope. After a while, she started getting prophetic dreams. That was already weird, considering she was pretty anti-theist. But she would get dreams from Paragon, saying she would be responsible for saving the halfling race, that in the future the halflings would be eradicated. That's a pretty big order, but Hilda is a heroic type and has fought things 5 times as big as her. She was up to the challenge. She wanted to prove herself to her hometown, where she was given an ultimatum years back to either lady up and marry a rich boy or join the army. She walked to the recruitment tent backwards, flipping her parents off. That was a big thing for her. The solution? You must marry Alistair. Nope.jpg. Hilda would do a lot of gross, awful things. She had been covered in blood, muck, drank out of a half-worked shoe. But she wouldn't do that. Hell, if it had been any other man, sure, a loveless, touchless marriage, as a last resort maybe. But Alistair? Oh, hell no. So being stubborn, she tried to find every way out of this. There had to be other solutions, other ways to protect the halfling race. She studied and researched, but the dreams persisted, insisting she had to bear Alistair's child. Out of game, Big Sexy was also persisting me, insisting they'd be such a good match for each other. She just needs to give him a chance, that so much was riding on this, blah, blah, blah. And between the in and out of game experience, I cracked. Fine. So, Hilda sadly married Alistair. Fine. Keep it on paper. Leave me alone. And when the time comes, give me a turkey baster. Ah, but it's not allowed like that. They had to go on honeymoon, having the DM take my character sheet away and not letting me play Hilda for a while. On the bright side, Alistair was also gone, but I just wanted to play my fighter. For a time, I played a child sorcerer because here's hoping they wouldn't try to pin a romance on a child. Eventually, I was given Hilda back. Big Sexy seemed satisfied and took the hint, having Alistair take care of something far away. Meanwhile, giants were invading Hilda's hometown. Finally, time to prove herself. So the party went to her town, armed to the bits, and Hilda took charge. She made good use of her giant slayer feat and slashed ankles. She kicked colossal ass, and it was incredible. The day is saved. The people are saved. All is good. There was much rejoicing. The halfling people began to erect a statue in the middle of town. Of Alistair. What? But he isn't even here, I protested. Big Sexy smiled. They know, but he's such a figure of goodness they associate this liberation with him. But don't worry. You'll always be known as his wife. That was the defining moment where all joy had been sucked out. It was abundantly clear my feelings weren't being taken into account. My character was just something he wanted to fix and break under his ego. I was stuck with a group that left me hungry, frustrated, and miserable. There is a happy ending to this, if you're petty like me. Around this time, I met my now fiancé. He asked me on a date for Friday night, which was when we played D&D. I was pretty burned out, and man, this guy was cute. So I said yes. I told Big Sexy on Monday that I had plans Friday, so he would have to find somewhere else to play that week. Went on the date, had a great time. Next Monday rolls around, and I ask Big Sexy how the game went. Terrible! We had to play at the school. We didn't have anything to eat. We had to be quiet. Clearly you don't care about the game at all. We don't want you around anymore. Consider yourself booted. And like that, I was out. According to Mitch, who I asked about the game afterwards, the game only lasted one session after getting rid of me. They all burned out and never spoke to each other again. Meanwhile, I never let any of this kind of shit happen in current games. My current group, including my fiance, has been playing ever since, and we've been having a wonderful time. Well, to be honest, I don't think I have any thoughts that would be any different from what I'm sure all of you are thinking right now after having heard this. So I'll leave that to you guys in the comments below to share your thoughts and feelings about this story. The only thing I will say is that I'm sure there's a common reaction among this community about the fact of, why didn't you leave? You know, this was so horrible. Why didn't you leave? And while I think OP already explained it well in Intermittent with her story, I do want to expand on it. I think it's very easy for a lot of us as third-party perspectives who aren't in the shoes and in the mind of these people affected by these stories to just say, why didn't you leave? And there are certainly some where it really does genuinely seem like they were self-aware enough that they should have left. But in a situation like this, I really do feel for OP. I used to be this kind of person, the sort of person that would be so desperate to have friends and to actually be able to socialize with people that I put up with some of the shittiest, most awful friends. And a lot of people have gone through that before, especially a lot of people who are nerdy and stuff like that. She even acknowledges in the story that part of the reason they were allowed to use her grandparents' house was because her grandparents were happy to just see her socializing and having friends. So I really do think that despite all of the really uncomfortable situations, despite the huge argument about the child healer, let's say, that she would have still stuck around. She probably felt like if she dumped this group of friends that she would be completely alone, that she wouldn't be able to find a new group of friends, especially not a group of friends that shared her interests or would have played this kind of game with her. While that was untrue, it certainly can feel like a very true thing in the moment when you're living through it. So I think in stories like this, while yes, she should have left, I think we do have to have some sympathy and understand why she probably didn't. And honestly, them dropping her was probably the best fucking thing that could have happened at the end of this story. I will also say I am very glad that this experience didn't completely ruin the game for OP. A lot of people, when they have these kinds of experiences in D&D, just completely drop the game. They never want to play it again because they just think that every game of D&D will be like this. So I am very happy that this wonderful medium is still being enjoyed by her, and it sounds like much better people now. But I'll end it there. Again, comments help the algorithm a lot, so please do comment with your own thoughts and feelings down below about this story, or if you don't want to share that, I would love to hear suggestions of more things to read in the future, whether it be other Reddit stories or just anything in general. I'm open to suggestions. And of course, like, comment, subscribe, maybe check out my Patreon if you have the time. You get videos like these pretty much as soon as I make them, as opposed to waiting for me to actually upload them. And I will see you next time, my lords, ladies, and lieges. Zodiac, out.